Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to the B2B Content Show, a podcast about the how, what, and why of B2B content marketing. The show is brought to you by Connversa, a podcasting agency that helps B2B brands start podcasts to connect with prospects, generate content, and grow brand awareness. I'm Jeremy Shear, and my guest for this episode is Kelly Stewart. Kelly is Content Marketing Director at Apprentice, which is a tech company that helps pharmaceutical manufacturers get medicine to patients faster. Kelly, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
So before we dive into our topic, just say a few words about Apprentice. How is it that you help pharma manufacturers help patients and get their medicines faster?
Great question. So, we have a software that streamlines data transfer, data entry. It basically lets you capture and share data in real time through the cloud. We also use augmented reality technologies to embed instructions onto your frame of view, which is actually a lot of fun. I've gotten to demo the product, and getting to navigate the real world with virtual instructions embedded on top is amazing.
Okay, very cool. Thanks for that. And that helps to lead us right into our topic because you mentioned the word data a couple times. And what I want to talk with you about today is using expressing complex data in a clear and relatable way in content marketing material. And I know that this is a key part of your guys' strategy in terms of the content that you put out there. So, and I think that that's, a good strategy for just about any content marketing team, right? Data is gold. If you have access to data, your own data or third-party data, if you can spin that into a compelling story, then that is one of the pillars of like uh, really strong content, right? So first, tell us your story. What kind of data are you and your team dealing with in your content marketing efforts?
So we deal with a mix of content types from highly technical content, such as operating procedures, to more informational content, like what is the cloud? How is it impacting pharma today? We also have a lot of industry perspectives, best practices, and recommendations.
Okay. So different kinds of information, different kinds of data. What do you do with that data? How do you use it to tell stories?
So for me, it all starts with finding the data that already exists. I do a lot of research, referencing, but I find that a lot of the time the data isn't yet written down, it's just inside of someone's head. And so I
Mm.
use a lot of interviews with subject matter experts, and they are always very busy. So I figured out a way to have it be a minimum time cost for them, but a maximum content output for me. And so to do that, I use templatized scripts, lots of targeted questions to surface their knowledge, and I record it. So I have a transcript to go back to and reference. And from there, it's a lot easier to build out the content.
Okay, let's dig into this a little bit more. So first of all, these subject matter experts, are they people at Apprentice internally, or are you reaching outside the company, or both?
Apprentice actually has a number of super smart people. We have over 150 resident geniuses, as I call them, and they have a wide range of expertise. So that's always my first destination.
Okay. So now you mentioned that these are very busy people, right?
Yep.
And that you have systems to make this work. You mentioned templates. So tell us about that.
Yes.
What kind of templates are you talking about and how do you use them?
I adore templates. So I'm just going to talk your ear off now. I create templates for interviews, for white papers, different templates for interviews if it's a glossary term, so that I can make sure I'm touching on the topics that our users are searching for most in Google. I have templates for the authoring docs. So when you build out the content, making sure that you've got all the right elements, making sure that the character counts are good, you've got all the metadata in there as well. And I have templates for cross functional collaboration so that when people outside of my main department want to work with me, we have a place to store all of our discussion points and projects.
Okay. So give me, if you can, a real life example of how you make this all work. Sort of starting at the beginning and take us through the process of connecting with a subject matter expert, getting the information, turning it into content.
Absolutely. So, a good example of this would be the life science glossary that I built out earlier this year. And from that, I started by Figuring out what our users wanted to read. So I went into our keyword research and I saw that a lot of our site visitors were searching for things like, what does this mean? What does that mean? What's the difference between X and Y? And I realized that a glossary is the perfect way to serve that up. So I figured out the content type and then I figured out my experts. So then I talked to a bunch of people, everybody. Basically, there's this spider web of knowledge at our company, and once you start learning who's based where, it's really easy to figure out. If somebody doesn't know the answer themselves, they're going to know who does. So then I figure out my subject matter experts to interview. I get the transcripts, and then I also bring them in for a review of the content before we start building and laying it out, so they can make sure it's technically accurate, it sounds right to them.
Okay, okay. So pause for 1 second. So you reach out to the subject matter expert. So first of all, who do you know who to reach out to?
I don't know. I'm a people person, so
Okay.
I work with a lot of different people, and I guess I just have a I got it in my head.
Okay, so in other words, so I'm assuming like over time for a given topic that you want to based on your research for audience interest, you say, okay, we want to create some content about this, and
Mhm.
then you say, okay, who's a good subject matter expert who knows about that, and so this is
Yep.
something you've just learned over time through personal
Yes.
connections with people. Okay. Um, when you reach out to them, how does that work? Is it just really informal, like, "Hey, can I ask you a few questions?" Or is it more formal than that?
I think it's important to get people excited about it so that they wanna
Mhm.
collaborate. So I think about the value that it would bring to them, not just to me and my content marketing team. So,
Okay.
one thing that I do is I feature our internal experts in our white papers in a new featured thought leader section. So, that'll
Mhm.
help bring prominence to their personal brand, let them showcase their own authority and expertise, as well as our companies.
Okay, great. So that's an important insight, right? And again, these are busy people, and even though they're
Hmm.
internal, right, your colleagues, they may or may not have time for this kind of thing all the time. So there has to be some incentive for them to do it beyond just, "Hey, do me a solid." Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like the carrot.
Okay, right. And so it's, hey, you're going to get featured prominently in this content, get your name out there. And just basic human psychology. A lot of people like that, like to be
Hmm.
featured and have a chance to talk about what they know and so on. Okay, so let's say you reach out and to the subject matter expert, you get a yes. Sure. How much time are you asking for typically?
I keep it to under an hour. I usually go for 45 minutes. It'll be 1 half hour recorded call. Beforehand, I do a lot of research to make sure the questions on that call are going to be the most helpful. Then I get a transcript, use that. And then once the content is built, edited, researched, fact checked, all that stuff, I send it over to them for a 15-minute read before I start laying it out.
Okay. And that's for like quality control, make sure the way that you're make sure they don't have any problems with it,
Hmm.
checking factual errors, that kind of thing.
Always good
Um,
to have a second set of eyes.
yeah, and you've mentioned that you record you so you interview the subject matter experts. How do you record them?
We use Zoom, and if you
Okay.
upload your recordings to the cloud, it will auto generate a transcript text file, which is so, so helpful for content creation.
Okay, right. So you get an automatic transcript from this, and then you turn it. And you mentioned a white paper, so you might use this. And then, so how does that work? How do you go from the interview and the transcript to actually writing the white paper? Say,
So the transcript is just material, right? It's not the
yeah.
content itself, but if the interview is done correctly, it should touch on a lot of the points that we want to cover. So I use that and then I start fitting it into a puzzle that tells a story that our reader's going to be interested in. You know, you want to start with a head nod to what their big pain points are and their challenges. You want to address the problems with current approaches and then gently guide them towards solutions and new modalities that they might not be familiar with.
Okay, and what are you using the transcript for exactly? I mean, I know that that's the content, right? That's the subject matter experts' ideas, thoughts, opinions, and
Mhm.
so on. But you're not just publishing the transcript, right? As you just said,
Absolutely
you're
not. No.
you're you're using it to create this white paper, and you have a structure for the white paper. What are you pulling from the transcript to put in the white paper specifically?
For me, one of the biggest values of the transcripts is the natural use of language. When we speak, we say things clearly, right? And concisely. And I think that a lot of times marketing speak can get overloaded with jargon and fancy words that don't need to be there. I use the transcripts kind of as a gut check to say, could I be saying this more simply? How would somebody
Mhm.
with a deep understanding of this topic be expressing it?
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, and what you're describing really sounds a lot like what journalists do, you
Hmm,
know, to tell a story. You go out and find sources, you interview them, and you kind of build the story around their quotes and their what they add to the story, right? Um,
totally.
and yeah, I hear what you're saying. When people are just talking, when you're interviewing them, I mean, in my experience, not everyone necessarily speaks super clearly all the time, but you're right that it tends to be more natural language. You're probably not going to speak certainly not in marketing jargon, right?
Hmm.
But here's another question though, like, especially if you're writing about something technical, like about something scientific or highly technical, a subject matter expert might use that kind of technical language, right? Because that's the language they speak and that they're used to. Um, how much of that do you end up using in the content you create? Or, I mean, I guess it depends on the audience. So, like, actually, let me refine the question. I'm not being very clear. So, let's say that you're writing a white paper, and the whole point is to get across some complex idea to a non technical audience, right? To make it
Hmm.
comprehensible, and you're interviewing subject matter experts that are sort of deep in the weeds in this stuff, right? And it's second nature for them to use all the jargony kind of terminology. Again, not marketing terminology, but
Hmm.
scientific or technical, whatever. How do you? How do you make use of that if you're trying to create a piece of content for a non-technical audience?
That is such a great question. So, this is one of the reasons why I created a life science glossary so that I could have a way to express all of these terms in their own ecosystem. Because if you're trying to do that inside of a white paper for every new term, it's going to be huge, bloated, and difficult to read. So instead, with the glossary, you can link out to those terms for people who are less familiar with them, but then people who are can just keep on reading.
Okay, right. So, in other words, you just need to be aware that okay, a lay audience might not know this term, so we need to
Hmm.
define it. hmm
Yep.
Do you ever use the technique of when you're interviewing the subject matter expert to say, "Look, here, this is for a non-technical audience. So, can you explain this to me like you would, to a 5-year-old or whatever the expression would be?"
Absolutely. I usually
Okay.
have a lot of overview questions that help to uncover just the main bullet points of the topic and are also aligned with the user search intent, which is
Okay.
generally a lot of questions about it.
Right. Okay. So now your strategy is to interview these subject matter experts. Um, you could ostensibly ask them to create content themselves, right? Hey, could you write a white paper for us? Could you record a video or whatever? Um, why don't you do that? Why interview them instead?
I think that one of the biggest roles of a content creator and one of the biggest joys is translating that expertise from somebody else to a wider audience. And I love that role. I wouldn't want to add to the workload of these already busy people. And I think that
Hmm.
expressing their ideas through accessible, clear language is a unique skill that they might not necessarily have because they have all these other very technical skills. So I think that finding their unique insights and points of view and making sure that we're presenting it in a way that's clear and that's also telling a compelling story is where the content creation comes in.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So if you were to ask a content matter or a subject matter expert, hey, can you write the white paper for me? Good chance it'll just never happen, right? It's not that person's job. They might
Hmm.
not, that's a particular skill, and they might not
Mhm.
be good at it. They might not want to do it. But
Mhm.
that's one way to get a no, right? Possibly to ask people to do things they don't have time for and they're not comfortable with, as opposed to, can I have a half hour of your time to ask you a handful of questions so I can do it? That's a much easier ask, I would think.
Absolutely. And it's also, I think, it can be a more engaging point of view when you're writing the content from an outsider's perspective versus somebody with deep industry knowledge who can get in the weeds. I know when I talk about stuff
Hmm.
I'm excited about, I go on tangents and I ramble. So when it's a new topic, it kind of gives you a more precise way to figure out what really needs to be said.
Right. Okay. Now, how much research, you mentioned that you do research. How much research do you typically need to do? Like, how much time do you spend on that to get your head around whatever the topic is?
I don't know if I can quantify it. Hours and hours. There's so much data out there. Our company, they give us these courses that we can take in biotechnology and
Hmm.
manufacturing that's really, really helpful. I don't think it ever ends. It's just an ongoing process.
Okay. So, but then again, I mean, there's only so much time, right? So you probably ostensibly could spend an unlimited amount of time learning more and more and more, right? But at some point you have to say to yourself, okay, I'm going to do this much research to get me to this level of knowledge, and then I'll be prepared to interview the subject matter expert. Like, how do you think about that? Because you're never going to be as knowledgeable as the subject matter expert, right? That's
Hmm.
the whole point of interviewing them, but you have to be knowledgeable enough to even know what questions to ask.
Absolutely. And that's why I do my research at the start before I interview
Yeah.
them. So I can learn enough to know which questions I should be asking.
Okay. And I would think too, I mean, if I was the subject matter expert and you came to me, I think the questions really matter, right? Not just so that you get the content you need, but also from the point of view of the subject matter expert to demonstrate, like, yeah, you've done your homework, like, you know what you're talking about, you know, and you're coming prepared. I would think, again, if it was me, I'd be much more inclined to do this again if you reach out to me, as opposed to if you're asking the most basic questions and it's pretty clear that, like, you're totally depending on me for everything to
Hmm.
explain
Hmm.
even the most basic things. I'm probably not going to think that's great, and I'm gonna think, "Oh, you
Hmm.
didn't really prepare. I'm wasting my time. I don't think I'm gonna do this again." What do
And
you
that's
think?
also not, yeah, I totally agree. And I think if you do it that way, it's also not strategic because then you're not able to get that bird's eye view of what the content outline should look like and how you should structure your content.
Okay.
Because you've got a lot of knowledge that you're unearthing, but it's up to you to assemble it in the right way. And you can only do that once you do research in advance to figure out what you're even talking about.
Yeah. So you record on Zoom, and are you recording, audio and video?
I think it generally default records all of that, but what I primarily use is the transcript.
Okay. Do you do anything with the video?
I currently don't, but we've got a team of marketers that they make a lot of webinars, so we do use a lot of video recording as well.
Okay. Right. Oh, it just kinda struck me like, "Oh, I bet you could get even more juice from these
Yeah.
interviews you're doing," right? Like, you have the transcript, and that's great, and you have video of them too, so anyway, that's a whole other topic, but, so through what have you learned then about approaching subject matter experts? And I guess in a way, this interview has kinda turned more into the art and science of working with subject matter experts than it has
Mhm.
specifically about telling stories with data, but I think that's really interesting. I mean, what have you learned about what not to do when it comes to working with subject matter experts?
What not to do? I would say one pitfall that I try not to do is to focus too much on the solution or the offering that's associated with it. I think that it is definitely understandable that people want to talk about that. We get excited about what we're offering and how we can position it, but going back to grounding it in the reader's needs and their priorities. Why do they want to read what we're writing? Why should they care about it? What can they stand to gain if they learn about this topic? So going back to the questions and make sure they're grounded in what people actually care about.
Okay. Yeah, good point. I mean, it does, at the end of the day, all come back to the audience and what they care about, and that's who you're trying to engage after all. So, well, one more question along these lines. So, we started by talking about data and using data to create content and do storytelling. I mean, one thing that's really interesting to me is that seems like it's pretty well known. In fact, there's, a lot of data around the fact that what tends to stick with people, like with the audience, is the narrative, right? The story and data points, like actual numbers, figures, stats, that kind of stuff, tends not to be as sticky, right? That's the stuff that people tend not to remember, 3 days later when they're going to remember it. So how how do you deal with that? On the one hand, having that data is super valuable, right? Everyone says that they want content with, backed up by data. On the other hand, data isn't always the most memorable thing about a piece of content. So once you've done these interviews and you're writing up the white paper or whatever kind of content, how do you balance that? How do you balance the storytelling part of it with the cold hard facts and figures?
I think that data plays a crucial role in supporting the message, but you should make sure that the data isn't the message itself. The message should be the point that you're trying to convey, and you should use your data to support that, not to override it.
Okay. Yeah, I like how you put that. Right. It's not people are not going to engage much with like a list of facts or list of
Mhm.
numbers, but if you embed them in a way that serves the narrative, then they very well might remember them or just makes the narrative stronger at the end of the day.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
using the data in a way that is more relevant to the user. Like, I think Apple did this when they came out with the iPod. They didn't
Hmm.
say how much storage there was. They said 1,000 songs in your pocket. And that's a way to make the data
Right.
sing.
Right. Okay. So, yeah, you're certainly not obligated to use every single data point at your disposal, right? You can pick and choose. This is going to help us get the message across in the right way, whereas these data points might just be confusing or get in the way.
And they often translate to more intuitive data points. Like, if you look
Hmm.
at uptime and downtime of software and accuracy, you can usually translate that into hours saved, money saved, ROI, stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it rounds back to what you said before. Keep the audience squarely in your sights, right?
Yep.
And that's going to guide you. Okay. All right. Really good stuff here. Let me ask you a few quick questions here to wrap things up. So, what's your single biggest challenge when it comes to producing content?
I would say keeping it short and sweet. And I'm not only talking about the overall length of the content, I'm talking about the paragraphs, the sentences. These can often start out really long. And I think that we have to be mindful of content density, not trying to cram too much into a limited space. So taking what's there, making it shorter and sharper to make it a more enjoyable experience to read.
Okay, I like that. Less is more, to use the cliched way of putting it, right?
Yep, yep,
And that's so right too. I used to teach writing at Indiana University in the School of Journalism, and I would always tell my students that one thing that you'll learn in this class is that it's actually harder to write a shorter piece than it is to write a longer piece. It seems
totally.
counterintuitive, but it's true.
Yep.
It's to limit yourself in that way, but it's ultimately often more effective, again, depending on the audience. But interesting point. Okay, next question. Strong and effective content has to be, and then you fill in the blank.
Scannable. Scannable.
Okay,
I
what
learned
does that
this.
mean?
So people read books, or at least they used to, sentence by sentence. But when we're looking at digital content online, we don't read it, we scan it. NNG did a study a few years back when they found out that only 28% of the words on a screen get read,
Hmm.
that's kind of depressing news to a content creator, right? That's barely more than a quarter of the words. So you have to figure out how to direct the user's attention and really clearly say, hey, this is where you should be paying attention. This is high value content. Look here. So you can use
Hmm.
different levels of section headers, you can bold words, you can use call outs, bulleted lists. All of these things help to draw the user's attention back onto where you want it.
Yeah, that is so true, right? I mean, we all do that. When if a blog post headline is intriguing enough to get you to click on it, even if it's, and it always says at the top, like this is a 3-minute read or whatever,
Yes.
whatever that's supposed to mean. I'm always still exactly. I'm just kind of scrolling to like, what's the gist here? Because probably the reason you're engaging with that content is there's something you want to learn how to do quickly,
Mhm.
or a bit of information that you just need at that moment or you're curious about, and you just want to find it and move on. You're not
Exactly.
kicking back and like, "Oh, yes, I just wanna revel in the beauty of this prose in this blog post." That's just not what you're doing, right?
Yeah, you're there to find a specific piece of information and then leave as soon as you find it. And that's why
Yeah.
content that promises scannability in the headlines performs really well.
Mm,
Clickbait like listicles, 10 top tips to do this, 5 ways to do
right.
this. You know, even before you click, that you're going to find a page with a clear numbered list that you can easily scroll through to find what you need.
Yeah. Okay. More to say on that, but we'll move on. So, what's a content strategy that you think is overrated?
I would go back to being too solution focused. I see it again and again. You know, what are our unique capabilities and features? You got to ground it in the benefits. And I see it come up honestly every time I'm on a restaurant website and I'm trying to find out something really simple like hours of operation, where are you located, what's your menu? And instead, I get a a mission statement from the chef, you know, a company story, photos of random people eating. It's like that all belongs somewhere on your site, but make sure that you're answering the user's top needs first and foremost.
Yeah, like that. And finally, the cousin question here. What's a content strategy that you think is underrated?
Content audits. I love content audits.
Mm,
And I know when people hear the word audit, you know, it can elicit a groan. It can seem like a time consuming or laborious thing, but it's actually such an effective way to figure out what you've got that's working and areas to address. You can
mhm.
start with a quantitative audit, get a sense of what you've got, but then when you layer in qualitative components like brand voice and tone, or do we sound like ourselves? Evergreen relevance, is this was great 5 years ago, is it still relevant or not?
Yeah.
And using
Yeah.
performance data, right? To say this web page gets a lot of traffic, let's prioritize updates on this page. Or this is super high quality but not getting seen that much, let's surface it up or maybe repurpose it.
Yeah, audits can be super helpful, right?
Yeah.
And okay, well, one last question, Kelly. How can people get in touch with you?
They can find me on my website, kellywritescopy.com. They can find my glossary that I made for my company, our life science glossary. And other than that, I wish them luck because my name is Kelly Stewart. It's very generic. So good luck finding me online.
Right. Well, you are on LinkedIn, of course, right?
Correct.
And we'll put a link to your LinkedIn bio on in the show notes. And any other links, if you want to send me a link to the glossary, we can stick it in there too. I bet some people would be interested in checking that out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, awesome. Well, Kelly, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time, and I enjoyed our discussion. I hope you did too.
As did I. It was great.